Canadians want to get tough on drunk drivers, but recently a judge decided that a young driver 3 times over the legal limit will not even have a criminal record. Joining me now to talk about this and other big issues is criminal defense lawyer Ari Goldkind, joining me once again from Toronto. Ari, an Ontario judge has struck down the mandatory minimum sentence for first-time impaired driving in the case of an Indigenous woman, basing his decision on issues like colonialism and racism. How does that even work?
So, Hal, this is a really troubling decision that should bother Canadians all across this land, not just in Toronto where this decision came out of. So I'm going to use a Seinfeld line, not that there's anything wrong with that us lawyers have to say when we're about to tear apart a judge's decision. Judge Paul Burstein is a lovely guy. I know him. He's thoughtful. He's well respected. He's a former defense lawyer. This decision, despite that caveat, is terrible. He goes through all sorts of reasons for people who don't know, there is a minimum punishment in the criminal code, and the minimum punishment is what's called a criminal record. He said, I'm going to call that imposition of a criminal record on this young lady who was so drunk as a skunk, people should know that, 3 times over the legal limit. He viewed her having a criminal record as, and I'm quoting now, cruel and unusual punishment, end quote. The idea in our society in Canada that somebody, even if they're Aboriginal or Indigenous, even if there's fetal alcohol involved, even if there's colonialism or all these other hot button political issues that we're not going to debate today, the idea that when you got behind the wheel, you're going to essentially get a free pass from a judge because her lawyer very skillfully and ably played the Indigenous sort of get out of criminal record card. It is something that even as a defense lawyer, while I'm jealous of the result, I think the result is absolutely terrible. And if I was Mothers Against Drunk Driving today, I would be spinning in the proverbial graves of all of those who have been killed by drunk drivers and all of those who haven't because the drunk driver was lucky enough to make it home without plowing into somebody.
Could and would a judge ever apply the Gladue principle to a white person who happened to grow up in a family that had a long history of substance abuse and similar broken family issues?
Amazingly, no. And this is the problem with our criminal justice system, that just like our political system has become obsessed with race, religion, identity, hashtags, white privilege, other groups who have no privilege. We've stopped looking at the human, we've stopped looking at the act, and we've essentially brought Twitter into the courtroom. And in my view, particularly when the criminal code is extraordinarily gentle on drunk drivers, they don't go to jail for a first offense. But if you're unlucky enough to hit somebody, then you're going to jail. What does it matter if you're lucky or unlucky enough that there's a little girl or a little boy in the roadway where you're driving like a mad person, sauced up? So if you're a white person who comes from a far worse background, or a black person, or a Muslim, or a Jew who has 500 more excuses than this young woman, you are not going to get a pass like Judge Burstein gave to this woman. So with all due respect to him, I understand not hammering Aboriginal people for certain kinds of crimes, but to say this is cruel and unusual punishment, it's a terrible precedent, and how I expect it to be overturned at the Court of Appeal.
Ben Fulton, a blind man, entered a gas station in Kamloops, British Columbia with his guide dog, and the attendant demanded that he remove the dog from the premises and then called the police when the blind man refused. Can you share more on the story, Ari?
I sure can, Hal, because wink, wink, nudge, nudge, just between you and me, Ben Fulton happens to be my articling student. And I hired him, and nobody knows this, but you're going to be the first to hear it because I've kept myself out of the story, but now I'm going to put myself in. I hired this man 1 year ago because nobody would give him a break because of the obstacles he has in life, going through life as a fully blind person. Now, truth be told, I hired his guide dog, Abby, but he has to bring Abby to court and to work with me. So I have to take Ben as I find him. But what happened in BC is no joke. And just for people who don't know, I'll give it to you in 30 seconds. Ben goes into a gas station, wants to buy a bottle of water. The clerk says, no pets allowed. Ben says, this isn't a pet. It's my harnessed guide dog, full service card, the whole thing. He's told, get out of here. He says, I'm not going. I'd like to buy my bottle of water. He's completely blind. Let's be clear now. We're not talking about a giraffe. We're not talking about a service pigeon. We're talking about the actual full Monty of blind man's guide dog. The clerk says, I'm going to call the police if you don't get out of here. My student says, please do, because what's the first thing Ben is thinking? Well, if the police come, they're going to know the law and they're going to tell this clerk, I have as much right to be here as every pack of gum and Snapple in here. The police come, and here's where the story becomes terrible. The police forcibly ask him to leave. He doesn't. He says, I don't understand why I'd have to leave. They then put the cuffs on him, arrest him arrest him. Now picture this. He's standing with his guide dog. They put the cuffs on him and arrest him. They then put him in the back of a cop car for 20 minutes until they realize what the heck they've done. They then release him. And when they're asked about it on major network news over the last 2 weeks, the ridiculous spokesperson for the RCMP, this is her answer. Ready? Ready for this? We weren't sure he was blind. We didn't know because we didn't see the dog. This is the RCMP, ladies and gentlemen, so I can assure you, my office is pursuing this. The Shell gas station gave a completely proper response. This should never have happened. We're looking into it. We want to get the footage. This is a disgrace of national proportions, especially if, like me, Hal, you're somebody that hates all these people trotting out the I'm disabled card. I do this, I'm that. Ben is the real deal. And for our National Police Service, sorry for the rant, but for our National Police Service to handcuff him, put him in the back of a cop car, and keep him there without his dog is so disgraceful to me. I don't know where to begin, but now I will take my indignation and I'll go back to my happy self. Next question.
I can see a big payout coming for Mr. Fulton. Let me ask you something, Ari. Legally speaking, was Mr. Fulton breaking the law when he refused to go outside at the request of police?
So first of all, let's go into the law. No, he's absolutely not. They have no authority. They have no grounds to what's called in law detain him. He's not committed any offense. He's not suspected to commit any offense. And in my view, Hal, and I mean this seriously, by cuffing him and arresting him and taking him out of there, they've actually assaulted him because they've acted without lawful authority. The arrest is without lawful authority. He's improperly detained. They had no business to take him out. And just to bring viewers right into this, they charge him with mischief. And anybody who's obsessed with their cell phone as much as I and most people are, just Google mischief and see if any of the definitions of mischief. It's only 4 lines. It's not a surprise. You don't have to go to law school. It is such a bogus charge that they conjured up on the spot that it's disgusting. And for me, who sees the way Ben conducts himself, such a respectful person, you imagine walking through life with both your eyes closed or a bag over your head and understand his life and think when your police service shows up to serve and protect you, they treated him like a piece of garbage, and the RCMP should be ashamed of themselves.
Now, speaking of the police, Ari, many police departments have their officers wear body cams. However, some police departments are choosing not to wear body cams. Why is that?
So that's an issue that's near and dear to my heart. I actually ran for political office 5 years ago. People don't know that, in a very successful campaign in Toronto. And one of the hubs of that was that all police officers in Toronto and across Canada should be wearing body cameras. Now, why does that matter? 2 reasons. One, when a cop is wearing a body camera, and just think this through in terms of when you were arguing with your spouse, if you knew you were being video recorded, or when you're driving home and you're thinking of giving somebody the finger, but you think it's going to end up on YouTube, it modernizes and governs your behavior. It minimizes your level of rage. It makes you think twice. So for police officers who are dealing with various and sundry people, often people who are obstinate and terrible, it makes a police officer dial down and seek to de-escalate. That's reason number 1, and that's very important for trust in the community. Reason number 2, and this is the part that only the Calgary Police Department gets right. They're the one department in Canada that has actually understood this. When cops are wearing body cameras, Hal, it actually 9 times out of 10, when some idiot civilian says the cops were too rough, or they beat me up, or they were disrespectful to me. As soon as the footage comes out, the footage shows that the cops are in the right. So while cops are hesitating and fudging all this, the proof in the pudding is that body cameras, by and large, when they're on, they're activated, they're worn on the lapel, just for people to understand. They actually exonerate cops 9 times out of 10.
Ayanli Hassan Ali was found not criminally responsible after he attacked several uniformed military personnel with a large knife back in March of 2016. Ari, a judge granted Ali permission to attend college unaccompanied while detained at a secure Hamilton hospital. That decision was appealed, and the appeal court held up the ruling. Now, is this fair to those who were sitting with Ali in class?
So this is something I've been talking about in the last 2 weeks, where we have really tipped the balance. And again, full disclosure, I'm a criminal defense lawyer. In court, I would be arguing this man's position. But just because I advocate something in court doesn't mean it's a view I share. Nobody should think that things said in court reflect the advocate who's saying it. The idea that if I had a child who goes to Mohawk College, that's the name of the school in Ontario, and they were to find out a man who through religious affiliations, let's just be politically correct, and mental health issues, it was the combination of both as found by the court. But most mentally ill people don't have a certain religious affiliation where they go into a military office to stab somebody up. The idea that if I have a child there, this man who left untreated is still a ticking time bomb, should be sitting next to my child when my child is at school to be educated and to be in a safe space. To me, that is a balancing of rights that is way too much to somebody who's mentally ill and way too little to the community. The Court of Appeal didn't step in for a legal reason that's a little bit boring. Suffice it to say, their reasons were the Ontario Review Board considered everything properly, so we're not going to substitute our decision for theirs. But if you're a parent in this community, you are really wondering why and for whom the criminal justice system or the mental health system exists if kids, and remember, we're talking teenagers, young people, are left with a man like this who could snap at any time.
This situation has a lot of similarities with the recent case of a hospital patient detained for killing his roommate. He also was found not criminally responsible, and he fled during an unaccompanied trip in the community, and then he managed to flee the country back to China. Should mentally ill patients be allowed back into the community?
So here's an answer that will bother a lot of people. The answer is absolutely yes, 100%. And this story has been told very poorly across a whole series of outlets. And here's what it is. And by the way, you know who Doug Ford is. And Doug Ford sort of set this off by saying, guys like this should be locked up and throw the key away forever. Now, for Paul Bernardo, that makes sense. But when you're a schizophrenic person and you're off your medication, you're in the community untreated, and people should understand in Canada how bad counseling and treatment is for mentally ill people until they do something horrible. Remember, until they do something horrible. Here's the point. If this man, his name is Zeben Kong, never got on that flight to China, we would not be talking about this. Why? He should have been flagged at the airport. The disgrace here is that he made it through all the security checks at an airport. You and I, Hal, if we were on a flight together to go somewhere, they're going to take away our sunscreen. They're going to take away our yogurt and granola because we've got a 5-hour flight, and they're making us take off our stupid shoes and belts. It's this facade of security. The idea that he makes it through Pearson Airport in Toronto, that's the disgrace of the story. The part that isn't being told is he's been in the community for many months doing extremely well. And for people in a mental hospital who are doing extremely well, you do increase their privileges. So the moral of the story here is it's border security and police forces that should have a lot of explaining to do, not the mental health system, even though I appreciate that a lot of Canadians agree with Doug Ford and say, just get rid of these people and lock them up in a mental institution forever.
Ari, the NDP has come out with a very interesting proposal. Make all adults potential organ donors unless they opt out. Are there any legal issues with what is known as presumed consent?
There are some interesting ones. And as somebody who, shall we say, Hal, I'm putting this mildly, is not a fan of the NDP, this is a really, really good motion by them. It's really important. First things first, before we get to the legalities. About 90% of Canadians, Hal, support organ donation if you die or if you're on death's door in a hospital. And remember, that's the time that the organ has to be harvested. Now, you couldn't get 90% of Canadians to agree that the sun rises in the east. So imagine that 90% of Canadians agree on this. But here's the problem. Only about 20% of Canadians or so, depending on the province, fill out the card that allows that consent. So what the NDP has done is say, we're going to reverse that. We're going to have an opt-out policy. I personally think it's an extremely positive move. There are those that don't like it because Canada is so multicultural now that certain religions won't love it. Well, who cares? I mean, the idea that that's going to trump the savings of lives should not matter. There are legal issues for children, and obviously who's going to be making those decisions, or somebody opting or changing their mind at the last moment, or a family member stepping in. But if you look at this as sort of somebody's last will and testament while they're sort of healthy and able to make that choice, it's a very, very good motion from the NDP. And here's a message I would say to people who oppose it. And by the way, Hal, the government of Singapore has addressed this issue. Now, what does Singapore have to do with this? I don't want to take their idea and pretend it's mine. But Singapore's position is simple. If you opt out of organ donation, and God forbid one day you need an organ, you go to the very back of the organ donation line. That is what we should have in Canada, and I say the NDP are to be commended for this.
Ari Goldkind, Toronto criminal defense lawyer and media commentator, thanks a lot for your time today.
Thank you, sir.